Imagine being the most powerful CEO in the technology industry, standing on stage in front of the entire world and confidently telling investors, journalists, and competitors that a certain technology is decades away from mattering. And then, less than 2 years later, your own research division publishes a result that directly contradicts everything you just said. That is not a hypothetical scenario. That is exactly what is happening right now inside NVIDIA, the most valuable semiconductor company on the planet. And the man at the center of this contradiction is none other than Jensen Huang himself. This is not a story about a company falling behind. This is a story about a company's own internal teams quietly proving their own CEO wrong, and the implications of that contradiction are bigger than almost anyone is talking about right now. To understand how significant this is, you first need to understand exactly what Jensen Huang said and why it sent shockwaves through the financial markets. At CES 2025, in front of a massive audience of investors, journalists, and technology leaders, Huang stated plainly that practical, useful quantum computers were still 15 to 30 years away. He went further, suggesting that classical computing, specifically NVIDIA's own GPU-accelerated systems, would remain the dominant force in computing for the foreseeable future. These were not casual remarks. These were the carefully chosen words of the CEO of a multi-trillion-dollar company, spoken at one of the most watched technology events of the year. And the market reacted immediately. Quantum computing stocks, including companies like IonQ, Rigetti, and D-Wave, crashed within hours of his comments. Billions of dollars in market value evaporated because the single most trusted voice in the semiconductor industry had just told the world that quantum computing was not worth taking seriously anytime soon. For a brief moment, it seemed like the quantum hype cycle had been definitively punctured by the one person whose opinion mattered most. If that kind of market-moving power does not impress you, hit like and subscribe right now, because what NVIDIA's own engineers did next is going to completely change how you see this story. So what does this have to do with NVIDIA proving its own CEO wrong? Everything. And the irony is almost impossible to overstate. Less than a year after Huang's comments sent quantum stocks crashing, NVIDIA itself launched a family of open-source AI models specifically designed to solve one of the hardest unsolved problems in quantum computing, error correction. The project, known internally as part of NVIDIA's quantum computing initiatives, was built specifically to help quantum systems manage and correct the errors that have historically been the single biggest obstacle preventing quantum computers from becoming commercially useful. Read that again. The same company whose CEO publicly dismissed quantum computing as decades away from relevance was simultaneously building specialized tools to accelerate quantum computing's most difficult technical challenge. This is not a minor side project buried in a research lab nobody pays attention to. This is NVIDIA positioning itself, quietly and deliberately, at the center of the very technology its own CEO told the world not to worry about. NVIDIA did not stop there. The company has been actively building what it calls quantum classical hybrid computing platforms, systems specifically designed to connect NVIDIA's GPUs directly to quantum processors from multiple hardware partners. In 2026, NVIDIA announced expanded partnerships connecting its computing infrastructure directly to quantum hardware, enabling quantum processors and classical GPUs to work together on the same complex problems in real time. Why would a company spend significant engineering resources building bridges between classical and quantum computing if quantum computing truly was 20 or 30 years away from mattering? The answer is simple, and it reveals something important about how large technology companies actually behave versus what their public statements suggest. Companies hedge. They protect themselves against every possible future, even the futures their own leadership publicly downplays. NVIDIA cannot afford to be wrong about quantum computing, and at some level deep inside the company, that risk is being taken extremely seriously, regardless of what gets said on a CES keynote stage. If you're starting to see why this contradiction matters so much, you already understand something most casual tech news consumers completely miss. Here is what makes this story even more compelling. Huang's original comments were not made in a vacuum. They came at a moment when NVIDIA's entire business model, and frankly, its trillion-dollar valuation, was built almost entirely on classical GPU-based AI computing. Every data center NVIDIA sells chips into, every massive AI infrastructure deal worth tens of billions of dollars, depends on the assumption that classical computing remains the dominant paradigm for the foreseeable future. A CEO downplaying quantum computing while sitting at the helm of the world's leading classical computing chip company is not just an opinion, it is also, whether intentional or not, a defense of the company's core revenue engine. Some industry analysts have pointed out that Huang's comments may have been less about genuine technical skepticism and more about managing market expectations during a period when NVIDIA was raising massive amounts of capital and signing enormous AI infrastructure deals. Whether that interpretation is fair or not, the timing is impossible to ignore. And yet, behind the scenes, NVIDIA's own engineering teams were already working to ensure the company would not be caught flat-footed if quantum computing arrived faster than its CEO publicly suggested. This pattern of public skepticism, paired with private preparation, is not unique to NVIDIA, and that is exactly what makes this story so important to understand. Throughout 2025 and 2026, Google, IBM, and Microsoft have all delivered quantum computing breakthroughs that directly contradicted the conventional wisdom that quantum systems were still decades from practical use. Google's quantum processor demonstrated verified quantum advantage. Microsoft pushed forward its topological qubit architecture. IBM crossed the 1,000 qubit threshold. Each of these milestones arrived faster than most experts, including Huang himself, predicted. By 2026, even the most cautious voices in the technology industry have been forced to quietly acknowledge that the quantum timeline is compressing far more rapidly than anyone confidently stated just 2 years earlier. NVIDIA's own internal pivot toward quantum classical hybrid computing is simply the clearest, most visible example of a company's actions speaking louder than its CEO's words. But here is what nobody is telling regular investors and everyday people who are not deeply embedded in the technology industry. When a CEO as influential as Jensen Huang makes a public statement about a technology's timeline, that statement does not just shape headlines. It actually moves billions of dollars in retirement accounts, pension funds, and personal investment portfolios. People who trusted Huang's assessment and avoided quantum computing investments based on his comments may have missed early positioning in a sector that is now accelerating faster than his own statement suggested. This is not financial advice, and nobody can predict markets with certainty, but it is a powerful reminder that even the most respected voices in technology are sometimes managing perception as much as they are predicting the future. Understanding the difference between what a company's leadership says publicly and what its own engineers are quietly building behind the scenes is one of the most valuable skills anyone following the technology industry can develop. The geopolitical and competitive stakes here extend even further. NVIDIA is not just hedging against quantum computing as an abstract future technology. It is positioning itself to remain the dominant infrastructure provider, regardless of which computing paradigm ultimately wins. By building hybrid quantum classical platforms now, NVIDIA ensures that even if quantum computing does eventually reduce the demand for massive classical GPU data centers, the company still controls the infrastructure layer, connecting both worlds together. This is a remarkably sophisticated strategic position, and it reveals a level of long-term thinking that goes far beyond a single CEO's public comments at a conference. It also raises an important question for every other major technology company watching this unfold. If NVIDIA, a company built almost entirely on classical computing dominance, is quietly preparing for a quantum future its own CEO once dismissed, what does that say about how seriously every other technology leader should be taking this shift right now? The bottom line is this. Jensen Huang's comments about quantum computing being 15 to 30 years away were not necessarily wrong in the strictest technical sense. Fully fault-tolerant, universally useful quantum computers genuinely may take years to mature. But the gap between that cautious public messaging and the urgency with which NVIDIA's own engineering teams have been building quantum classical infrastructure tells a very different story than the one that crashed quantum stocks at CES 2025. Companies do not invest serious engineering resources hedging against technologies they genuinely believe do not matter for decades. They hedge against technologies they privately believe could arrive far sooner than their public statements suggest. NVIDIA's actions, not its CEO's words, are the clearest signal available right now about how seriously the world's most valuable chip company is actually taking the quantum computing threat to its own dominance. The companies and investors paying attention to what NVIDIA is building, rather than simply what Jensen Huang says on stage, will be the ones positioned correctly when this technology shift fully arrives. Make sure you are paying attention to the right signal. And if this video helped you see the gap between corporate messaging and corporate strategy more clearly, hit the like button and subscribe to Quantum Pulse, because stories like this one are exactly what this channel is built to uncover.